Good evening, members, friends, and distinguished guests. My name is Guy Kamealoha Noah, President of the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of South Florida, or APABA. APABA South Florida is a nonpartisan voluntary bar association comprised of attorneys located in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. APABA's overriding mission is to promote diversity in the legal profession and combat discrimination against all minorities, both within the legal profession and the community at large. And on behalf of APABA South Florida, I want to welcome and thank you for joining us for APABA South Florida's presentation of The Murder of Vincent Chin, Child Re-Enactment. Before we begin, I want to say thank you to our co-hosts, the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Tampa Bay, the Greater Orlando Asian American Bar Association, and the Jacksonville Asian American Bar Association. Thank you to the law firm Greenberg Traurig, our technology sponsor for this event. Our event sponsors, the Koziak Minority Mentoring Foundation, Margaret Child Starner, Field Point Private, and APABA South Florida's annual sponsors, Waller White Burnett, St. Thomas University School of Law, Buckner Miles, Navarro McCown, Focus Forensics, and Kim Von Lerner. Without you, this event would not be possible. Sincerely thank you for your support. We also want to show some love to the Asian American Bar Association of New York for its permission to use the script for this event, Building Our Legacy, The Murder of Vincent Chin. Also, thank you to Jury Group for use of their presentation slides and the Florida Bar Young Lawyers Division for their support. Special thanks to our producers for this event, immediate past President Sandy Chu, Artistic Director Alan Ginn Ayers, and Director Bernice Lee. Additionally, I want to recognize some of our distinguished guests in the house with us tonight, including from the 11th Judicial Circuit, Judge William Outfield, Judge Carol Kelly, and Judge Jason Demetrius. From the 17th Judicial Circuit, Judge Tabitha Blackman and Judge Natasha DePrimo. Florida Bar Board of Governor for the 17th Judicial Circuit, Lorna Brown Burton. Vice Mayor for the City of Hollandale Beach, Sabrina Javellana. Executive Director for the National Association of Asian American Professionals, Cindy U. Robinson. Founder and President of the Tampa Bay chapter of the National Association of Asian American Professionals, or NAP, Man Le, and Chapter Director for the DC chapter for NAP, Alan Chow. Also with us, Robert Vaughn, President of the Broward County Bar Association. Mark Mayer, Director for the Broward County Hispanic Bar Association. Tricia Gay Cotterill, President of the Caribbean Bar Association. Therese Morgan Joseph, immediate past President for the Caribbean Bar Association. And LaShonda Jackson, President of the Orange County Bar Association. Also, Program Director for the Miami-Dade County Asian American Advisory Board, Joshua Ho, and Director for the Miami-Dade County Asian American Advisory Board, Josephine Gordy, are with us. Finally, a few of our past presidents of APABA South Florida, Alan Su and Hung Nguyen, are with us tonight. APABA South Florida is excited to share with you this timely event and the importance of Vincent Chin's legacy. And we thank you all so much for joining. And I say it's timely because of the parallels between events at the time of Vincent Chin's murder and the circumstances we face today, including the scapegoating of Asian Americans generally for an external event impacting the United States, dramatic rise in Asian American rhetoric and violence, both then and now, and the resulting and ongoing Asian American and Pacific Islander activism to address and combat this rise in discrimination, not only against AAPIs or Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, but all minorities. Now, we do want to warn you that this presentation contains some strong language and depiction of violence, so it may not be suitable for children. At this time, I want to introduce Bill Simonich, past president of APABA South Florida, as well as past president of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, who will provide opening remarks. Bill?
Thank you, Guy. I should add that I am currently a proud member of the Greater Orlando Asian American Association, and I'm thrilled that they're part of this. So this trial reenactment preserves a forgotten chapter of American history. The murder of Vincent Chin in 1982 and the uproar that followed birthed Asian American civil rights organizations around the country. Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, and other communities who hadn't previously thought of themselves as Asian Americans with common interests banded together for the first time. This tragic death in Detroit reverberated nationwide. Now, I remember when I first met with local Pan-Asian community organizations in South Florida, and several of them told me how they had formed specifically in response to the Vincent Chin murder and trial, and how they had joined the rallying cry for justice. The Vincent Chin trial was also the first time that Asian Americans were protected in federal civil rights prosecution, thanks to an opinion in the case from the Sixth Circuit. Many, including the Michigan ACLU and the Michigan National Lawyers Guild, had opposed a civil rights investigation in the case, arguing that Asian Americans were not protected by federal civil rights laws. But we should not consider the murder of Vincent Chin to be merely a cry from the past, because it continues to echo forward today. It echoed when South Asian Americans and Muslim Americans were beaten after 9/11. We hear it today when people are attacked for the color of their skin or for the God they praise, and their attackers are not brought to justice. So without further ado, here is the murder of Vincent Chin trial reenactment.
This much is certain. On June 19th, 1982, just outside Detroit, Vincent Chin, 27 years old, of Chinese ancestry, a working-class American citizen, engaged to be married the following week, went out with friends for a bachelor party. At a strip club, they encountered two men, Ronald Evans and his son, Michael Nitz. There was an altercation. It continued outside. Sometime later and a few blocks away, Nitz held Chin down as Evans swung a baseball bat. The bride's-groom head was split open. Blood, spinal fluid, and cerebral matter pooled onto the pavement beneath him as he collapsed into a coma. Chin died 4 days later. In state court, Evans and Nitz faced criminal charges. They accepted a plea bargain. At the sentencing, the prosecutors failed to appear. Judge Charles Kaufman imposed on each man 3 years probation, a $3,000 fine, and court costs. Everything else is disputed. There would be 2 federal criminal trials, a protest movement, and more publicity than had ever been devoted to any incident involving an Asian American. Yet the context, the causes, the consequences of the Vincent Chin case all have been the subject of great controversy. Although the Vincent Chin case has ceased to be infamous, for Asian Americans, it has never stopped being iconic.
The Vincent Chin case is very much part of our legacy as Asian Americans. This evening, we will explore that legacy by reenacting portions of the court proceedings for you, drawing from the transcripts and court decisions. The words you will hear are the actual words, with minor editing for length.
We begin with the sentencing in Wayne County Circuit Court on March 16, 1983. Evans and Nitz were charged with second-degree murder, but the prosecutors offered a plea bargain to manslaughter. Both men accepted, with Evans pleading guilty and Nitz no contest. At sentencing, both men were represented by counsel. As was common at the time, because of the high volume of cases and lack of resources in Wayne County, no prosecutor appeared. Nor were the victims' families and friends notified. Defense lawyer Bruce Saperstein spoke on behalf of Evans and argued that Chin was the instigator.
Your Honor, but for the physical assault by the victim in this case, the victim initiating the physical assault, this crime would never have been committed. Mr. Evans and Mr. Nitz were seated, and the victim walked up and punched Mr. Evans in the mouth. During the scuffle, Mr. Nitz had his head cut open, was bleeding profusely, and in fact, required stitches. Either side, Your Honor, could have been the victim in this case. They could have changed places in this particular case. I think Your Honor would agree in looking at the background. And the background of Mr. Evans is impeccable. Mr. Evans is not a heinous criminal. I don't believe that rehabilitation is even in order in this case. I'm confident this would never happen again. And God knows that these gentlemen would like to see this man come back. But we can't change what happened. With respect to punishment, Your Honor, Mr. Evans is being punished every day of his life over this incident. He can't change that. He has to live with this. His work background is excellent. 17 years, Chrysler.
Mr. Evans, do you wish to say something?
Only that I'm deeply sorry about what happened. If there's any way I could change it, I sure would.
I was looking to see if there was any background on the victim. Do you have any background on him? Does he have a criminal record?
I don't have any background on him either way, Your Honor.
It is the judgment of this court that each of the defendants be placed on probation for a period of 3 years. In addition, I require that each of you pay $260 a year at a rate of $25 per month, that each of you pay an additional fine in the amount of $3,000 at a rate of $100 per month. I'll leave the question of restitution to civil proceedings.
Judge Kaufman did not explain his reasoning for imposing a sentence of probation, but months later in an interview, he stated that
these weren't the kind of men you sent to jail. You don't make the punishment fit the crime. You make the punishment fit the criminal.
Traditionally, Asian Americans have believed that they should not make waves, and that Asian Americans had always been reluctant to discuss race. Asian Americans did not know the language of civil rights, and in the early 1980s, the subject of race was largely black and white. The Asian American community, however, was galvanized by the notion that a Chinese American could be beaten to death because of his race, with his killers sentenced to only to probation and a fine. The two men were white auto workers in Detroit. One was out of work at a time when the U.S. auto industry was under tremendous pressure from Japanese imports. Detroit in 1982 was perhaps the hardest place in America to be Asian American. You were the face of the enemy. Anti-Japanese sentiment was at its height. There was taunting, violence, and public displays, including scenes of politicians and union leaders demolishing Japanese imports. That Jap crap with sledgehammers.
it was against this setting that Asian Americans found cause to speak up. For the first time, Asian Americans crossed ethnic and socioeconomic lines to join together to seek justice for Vincent Chin. Led by, among others, attorney Liza Chan, journalist Helen Zia, and Vincent's mother, Lily Chin. A number of Asian Americans formed American Citizens for Justice. Their efforts to publicize the case were remarkably successful. The extensive publicity was virtually unanimous in its criticism of the sentence, the judge, the prosecutors, and the two defendants. The case was described as an outrage, the product of racism.
In June 1983, Liza Chan, Lily Chan, and others met with the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. to urge the government to bring federal criminal civil rights charges against Evans and Nitz. Because of ACJ's efforts, the Justice Department received thousands of letters and signatures on petitions urging it to prosecute Evans and Nitz. In November of 1983, a federal grand jury in Detroit indicted Evans and Nitz for interfering with Chin's right to use and enjoy a place of public accommodation. The Fancy Pants Lounge, on account of his race and conspiracy to do the same. The case was assigned to Judge Anna Diggs Taylor, one of the first African-American women to be appointed to any federal court in the country. The case was extensively litigated with numerous pretrial motions, including a motion to dismiss the indictment on the grounds that the federal civil rights law in question applied only to blacks, and that Orientals, who were considered by many to be white, were not protected. There was also a motion to change venue because of the adverse pretrial publicity. Both motions were denied.
Trial commenced on June 5, 1984. It was undisputed that Ebbins and Nitz killed Vincent Chin, but there was sharp dispute over the issue of motivation. The government had to prove Ebbins and Nitz acted because of Chin's race. We turn now to the opening statements from the United States versus Ronald Ebbins and Michael Nitz, the first of the two federal trials. Theodore Merritt from the Justice Department opened for the government, while defense attorney David Lawson spoke for Ebbins.
May it please the court, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show that on June 19, 1982, a brutal crime was committed on the streets in Highland Park. On that night, the defendant, Ronald Ebbins, held by his co-defendant, Michael Nitz, repeatedly beat with a baseball bat a Chinese-American citizen of the United States by the name of Vincent Chin. And they beat him so badly that he died 4 days later from massive head injuries. And the evidence will show that Vincent Chin died at the hands of these defendants because he was a Chinese American and because he was enjoying the entertainment of a public bar. The evidence will show that this fatal assault was preceded an hour or so earlier by a confrontation at that bar between Vincent Chin and the defendants. The confrontation was caused by Ronald Ebbins' barrage of obscenities, baiting, and racial insults directed at Vincent Chin. What happened in Highland Park that night was a story of ugly racism which turned violent.
Now, the burden is on the government to prove not only that Ronald Ebbins and Michael Nitz were responsible for the death of Vincent Chin, but to also show that they killed Vincent Chin because of his race, and with the intent to deny his right to use the Fancy Pants Lounge. Now, we do not believe that the evidence will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Ebbins acted because of Vincent Chin's race. We believe that the evidence will show that this was not a civil rights case, but a fight between angry and intoxicated men that ended in the death of one of them.
Lawson gave Ebbins' version of the altercation. He also attacked the government's witnesses and suggested the issue of race was a fabrication.
Look, the witnesses will tell you that Ebbins was in an outrage, and he began swinging the bat at Vincent Chin. The bat struck Mr. Chin several times, including in the head, the neck, and other parts of his body. Mr. Chin fell in the street with a mortal wound to his head, and he died 4 days later. As a result, Ronald Ebbins was charged with murder. He pleaded guilty in the Wayne County Circuit Court to manslaughter. Then something happened in that court on March 16, 1983, which set off a chain of events that resulted in this trial today. And that was when Ron Ebbins got probation for killing Vincent Chin. Naturally, that type of sentence in a case such as this one upset and enraged Mr. Chin's family and friends, and also members of the community. And you will hear evidence that after the sentence of probation, Mr. Chin's friends and others met, and they tried to come up with some evidence that would turn this homicide into a federal matter. We expect that the government will try every opportunity to inject some evidence of racial sayings or racial acts into this case. And because of the massive publicity in this case, because of the influence placed on the witnesses, and because of the strong beliefs held by some members of the community that there was some evidence to support the government's charges, we expect that that the testimony of the witnesses will be distorted or changed to support the government's charges.
One of the most important witnesses was Racine Caldwell, one of the dancers at the Fancy Pants Lounge. As one of the jurors revealed in a post-trial interview, Caldwell was seen as a neutral witness who had no reason to lie. Her testimony was critical on the issue of motivation.
Now, where are you employed, Miss Caldwell?
Fancy Pants.
Now, Miss Caldwell, let me ask you to direct your attention to the night of June 19th, 1982. Were you working at the Fancy Pants Lounge on that night?
Yes, I was.
And did you see Vincent Chin at the Fancy Pants on that night?
That evening, yes.
And could you describe the mood when you saw him?
He was laughing and joking.
Now, did you dance on that night?
Yes, I did.
And did you see Vincent and his friends while you were dancing?
Yes, I did.
And how long did you dance for anyways?
Approximately 12 minutes.
And could you describe how Vincent was acting while you were up on stage?
Happy. Laughing.
Now, what did you do after you finished dancing?
I got off the stage and I went back to freshen up in the dressing room. And I came back out to talk to the customers.
And did anything happen while you were out there talking to customers?
Yes. I came close to a couple people that was loud talking, like arguing. I turned around and I seen Vincent and a couple people arguing.
And do you see the man in the courtroom today that you saw arguing with Vincent?
Yes.
And can you point him out?
He has on the blue shirt, blue tie, and light blue blue suit, blue tie, and light blue shirt.
Okay, and what did you hear the defendant say?
All I heard him say when I turned around is, "It's because of you little motherfuckers that we are out of work."
And after you heard that, what else did you hear?
Well, Vincent came back with a remark like, "I'm not a little motherfucker." And then it was stated to him, "Well, I'm not sure if you're a big one or a little one." And by that time, he got mad.
I see. And who said that to Vincent?
That gentleman over there.
Did you hear Vincent make any comments directed at the defendant?
No, other than, "I'm not a little motherfucker."
Did he ever call the defendant anything?
Not that I heard, no.
In what tone of voice would you say that the defendant was using to talk to Vincent?
A loud tone of voice.
Okay, what happened next?
He pushed him on the shoulder, kind of hard. He pushed him. And they got into a fight, and the younger fellow jumped in and started helping him.
And who is that?
That's the gentleman that started helping the older man when he was hitting Vince.
And did you subsequently learn that person's name?
Yes, Michael Nitz.
David Lawson cross-examined for Mr. Evans.
So Mr. Evans was speaking in a loud tone of voice?
Like an argument, like if I was arguing with somebody.
Was he shouting?
Yes, I could hear him over the music.
Now, when he was shouting, what did you hear him shout?
"Because of you little motherfuckers, we are out of work."
And then Vincent responded,
"I am not a little motherfucker."
Okay. Now, when you were making the rounds and talking to customers, is that part of your business also?
Yes.
And were you soliciting customers?
No, I was not.
Were you asking them if they wanted a lap dance?
No.
Vincent was a friend of yours, right?
A customer, not like a personal friend, no.
But you liked him,
Yes,
and you liked to see him come in, right?
yes.
Another important witness was Jimmy Choi. He and two of Vincent's other friends, Gary Koivu and Bob Sarosky, were celebrating with Vincent that night. On direct examination, Choi described the events leading up to the bachelor party and then testified about the encounter with Evans and Nitz.
So, Mr. Choi, how loud was the music on the stage that night?
It was not blasting like, it was just, the volume was normal.
So you could carry on a conversation with the person next to you?
Yes, Gary.
And what about the people who were across the stage from you? Could you hear what they were saying in the conversation?
No, I didn't pay too much attention at first. Then after a while, I heard a few things.
What did you hear and where did it come from?
I was in the bar for about 15, 20 minutes. Then I heard someone mention foreign cars from across the stage. I didn't pay too much attention. I just glanced around and I resumed talking to Gary.
Did you hear anything else coming from the side of the stage?
Then I heard Vincent saying something first, okay? He was talking across the stage.
And did you hear any other statements from the men across the stage?
Yes, I heard the word nips calling toward our direction. I recall Vincent saying that we're not Japanese.
And so that is what you referred when you understood them to mean?
I understood it to be a slang for Japanese.
I see. Now, when you looked over and you saw, well, did you see who was making the statements in the first place?
Yes,
And do you see him in the courtroom today?
yes,
Can you point him out?
yes,
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has identified Defendant Evans?
Yes.
Now, when you looked over, was he looking over on the side of the table when he said nips?
yes, across in our direction.
Now, did there come a time when you heard some more words exchanged across the table?
Yes, I heard Vincent say in a loud voice, "Don't call me a motherfucker. I am not a motherfucker."
I see. And then what happened?
And I heard the gentleman say, "Big fucker, little fucker, we're all fuckers."
Okay. And so what happened after he made that statement?
Vincent kept on saying, "Don't call me a motherfucker." Then he got mad and said, "Come on, let's get outside."
And then what did Vincent do at that point?
Came around the stage and went over to where the two gentlemen were sitting. The man with the gray hair stood, and Vincent punched him.
Okay. What happened next?
And they started exchanging blows.
Choi continued to describe the scuffling in the bar, and then he moved on to what happened outside.
Mr. Choi, what did you see happen next?
He just went to the car, lifted up the hatchback, and pulled out a baseball bat.
Did you see which one got the baseball bat?
Man there.
The man that you previously identified as Mr. Evans.
Yes.
And what did Mr. Evans do what did he do when he got the baseball bat?
Started in not a run, something like a trot, holding the bat like this. And Vincent said, "I'm not going to fight you with a baseball bat." Then they kept on coming. So Vincent ran away from them.
And at that point, they pursued Vincent?
Yes, they did.
Choi explained that Evans and Nitz were unable to catch Chin. They returned and asked the other two members of their group, Gary Koivu and Bob Sarosky, "Where is your friend?" Choi testified that when Evans and Nitz saw him, they said, "Let's get this little fucker." At that point, Choi ran away as well. Eventually found Vincent, and the two stopped at a parking lot in front of a McDonald's. We continue now with Choi's direct testimony.
Mr. Choi, then what happened?
Well, we were still sitting. Then all of a sudden, I heard Vincent say, "Scram." I turned around, and I saw the two men right behind us, 3 to 5 steps.
And what did you do?
Well, I scrammed, ran towards north of McDonald's right off the bat.
And how far did you run?
30 yards. Then I turned back.
And what did you see at that point?
Saw Vincent running across, just about getting to the median of the cars. And the younger man came up and tried to grab him from behind, pull him around, and they were scuffling. And the older man came with the bat.
And what did you see when he approached Vincent with the bat?
He approached. Vincent was still trying to get away from him. And then the older man, he could not run too fast. He kind of hobbled. He took a swing at Vincent's knees.
Okay, and then what happened after that?
At that point, the knees, one swing, upper extension on Vincent, and he blocked like this.
And then what happened? What did you see Vincent do next?
Well, he was going down slowly, like this. And the old man took a swing right at his head.
And what did you do at that point?
I don't know. I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was going, I cannot believe it.
Okay, what else did you see?
Seemed like slow motion. Vincent was going down. Then I saw another blow. Then he was kind of in a crawling position like this. And then it was in a frenzy, like while he was swinging, he was saying something which I could not hear. He kept mumbling.
How many times would you say that you saw him swing the bat?
Well, the first blow, I saw it very vividly.
And where did that blow land?
Right here.
And after that?
One more blow to the head while Vincent was going down. He kept swinging. I don't know whether it was connecting or not, but I could not believe it.
And what did you do?
Well, I ran back. I just ran towards the direction, right to Vincent.
Okay, and what did you see when you got there?
All of a sudden, I saw guns, service guns. Then I stopped abruptly. I saw a black man holding the gun. He pulled out a badge like that and told the older man to drop his bat.
Now, when you went over to Vincent, was he conscious at this point?
He was still conscious.
Was he saying anything?
Yes. I cradled his head. I said, "Hey, Vincent, are you all right?" And he was saying, "Fight, fight, not fair."
Was he speaking in Chinese?
Chinese.
Okay, and then what did you do?
I said, "Somebody get a bloody ambulance." I didn't see anyone move. So I ran inside the McDonald's, called the ambulance.
Then did you go back outside after that?
Yes, I ran straight to Vincent.
And at that time, was he still conscious?
He was still conscious. And then he said, then I said, "Okay, Vincent." I shook his hand. Snap up, snap up, snap up. The ambulance will be right here. I was holding his hand the entire time.
Now, did you actually travel with him in the ambulance?
Yes, I did.
And did you say anything to the defendants before you got in the ambulance?
Yes. I saw them talking to the police officers, saying something like, "I didn't mean to hurt this boy. and he said, "My son is hurt." I was totally outraged. I said, "If I had a gun, I would shoot you both right here."
And then you got in the ambulance at that point?
Yes.
One of the defense counsel's principal themes on cross-examination was that Choi had been unduly influenced by others. Choi and other witnesses had met as a group before trial with Liza Chan, the attorney who helped form American Citizens for Justice. Chan met with the witnesses to prepare them for their testimony. The meetings were recorded, and the recordings were transcribed. Defense counsel wanted to introduce the recordings into evidence to show that the witnesses colluded to come up with the evidence that race was a motivating factor. The government objected to the tapes as hearsay. Judge Taylor sustained the objection, although she permitted defense counsel to confront a witness with his own words on the tape, but only his own words. She ruled that Liza Chan's statements to the witnesses could be introduced only through her, and only if she were called to the stand. Frank Eman, one of Eben's attorneys, cross-examined Choi.
Well, you have been asked a lot of questions by a lot of people before coming to court today.
Yes.
And one of those people was Liza Chan.
Yes.
Now, you met with several people about what happened at the Fancy Pants Lounge, and that included the meeting with Liza Chan in April, with the FBI in May, and with Liza Chan again in May. Do you remember those meetings?
I do.
And you knew at each of those meetings that the FBI was investigating a civil rights violation.
Exactly.
And you knew, did you not, that the investigation was not about whether those men did what they did.
Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Choi does not know what the point of the investigation was. Her question has no foundation.
It goes to the witness's state of mind.
Overruled.
Now, you knew, did you not, that the investigation was whether these men were motivated in doing this act because of your friend's race.
Your Honor, I object again. Mr. Choi did not know what the investigation was, and the investigation did not have any particular aim in its course.
Mr. Choi may answer the question. This is cross-examination.
Did you know that?
I had a vague idea.
A vague idea.
Yes.
Sir, you knew that it was significant whether any racial remarks were made inside the Fancy Pants. Did you know the significance of that?
I knew the significance, but I did tell the truth.
Choi acknowledged that he did not recall using racial terms when he had spoken earlier to Liza Chan and the FBI. In trying to explain why not, Choi echoed certain familiar themes. Asian Americans do not make waves, Asians do not complain of discrimination, and Asians do not use race as an excuse.
And can you explain then, when you met with Liza Chan in April, why you did not tell her that you heard the word "nit"?
Okay, because that was when the prosecution at the state level, ended. I was in Toronto for my internship. I got back, I didn't know what happened, and all of a sudden, this lady lawyer came to me. I was not prepared, not as much as I wanted to be. I don't ever want to mention discrimination. And she was going for the criminal portion of the case. She didn't ask me about discrimination. As I thought about it, more things popped up to me.
Because since April of 1983, the more you thought about it, the more these remarks popped up?
It depends. It all depends on what has popped up in my memory. All of a sudden, little things, a few things came back to me.
Well, let me just clear this up, if I might. When you met with Liza Chan in April of 1983, you knew that that was after these men were sentenced to probation.
I knew that, yes.
Do you remember Liza Chan asking you? Nobody actually heard anything. I mean, actually heard how it started. What started it? And in answering, I would believe that Evans may have made a smartass remark. Do you remember telling her that?
Yes?
And I guess you are telling us today that in April of 1983, you didn't remember that the word nip had been used.
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember also at that interview in April of 1983 being asked by someone, besides that, did they say anything like Chinaman and things like that type of thing, just the four-letter word? And in telling them, I had not heard that. I don't think they made any racial remarks, nothing. Did you tell Liza Chan that?
Yes, I did.
Now, when you met with the FBI agent in May, you did not remember yet that the word nip had been used.
No.
Mr. Choi, am I correct that the first time you mentioned the use of the word nip was before the grand jury?
Yes.
At these meetings that you had with other witnesses, do you remember with Gary Koivu and Bob Sorosky?
Well, we had a meeting. Yes, we did.
And you each talked about what each of you had seen and heard that evening.
Yes, we did.
And do you remember what you asked Gary? Whether he heard you say anything about, we are not Japanese?
Cannot recall. That was a year and a half ago. This is just like 3 conversations. Everyone was talking. We were like, what do you remember? Well, do you remember that? That is the extent of the meeting.
Now, some people didn't remember some things.
Yes, and a few things, okay. Somebody said, okay, well, you did that. And I said, yes, I remember that. Yes, I kind of have an idea now.
Well, was the purpose of the meeting to get the stories together for this case?
No, ma'am.
Now, did you receive advice from anyone about what parts of this story to tell and which parts not to tell?
I didn't receive any advice to that effect. I was advised to tell the truth and the whole truth.
Don't you believe that Vincent got angry and overly reacted?
I don't think he overly reacted.
Didn't you tell Liza Chan that, in your opinion, he overly reacted? Will you look at page 11 of the transcript?
Let me think. If I did, I made a mistake. He did not overly react. He tried to ignore any racial remark. We tried.
I am referring to right here.
Oh, did I say that?
You do recall saying that then?
I read it. Yes.
Now, at the time you said that, you were describing to Liza Chan in April events which, to the best of your memory, were completely devoid of any racial provocation.
Well, there was a time, okay, for Chinese, we try not to, shall I say, react. Usually, we can take a lot of things. There was a time when I just asked, basically, in the bar, how did he grab him? How did he swing the bat? And she was not really looking for racial remarks. If you go there, it was not a very good place to go to in the first place. I didn't want to do anything. Plus, I tried to shun all the racial things away from me. I had a few experiences, mostly when I deal with my classmates at school. But a few times when somebody drives by and just told me chink, I tried to brush it aside.
After the government rested, the defendants put on a brief defense case. Evans chose to testify.
What happened when you sat down at the bar?
Sat down. I think I got one sip of the glass of beer and this black dancer was dancing, and I remember comments coming from across the stage directed at her and telling her what a crummer dancer she was, okay?
Did you see who was making those comments?
I really don't know who was making those comments.
You know they were coming from across the stage, however.
Yes.
What did you do then?
I don't like seeing people picked on, for a starter.
What did you do?
You know, I made a comment to the effect that, don't worry about those guys. Show them what a good dancer is.
Did you direct those comments at anyone in particular?
No, just a dancer.
Did you say anything else?
Not at the time that I remember.
When you made those comments, do you recall referring to people across the stage using the term fucker or motherfucker?
I don't remember distinctly.
Could you have said that?
Yes, I could have.
Do you or have you ever used words like that before?
Many times.
Is that language unusual to you?
No, it isn't.
When you used those words, if you did, was it your intention to insult anyone or provoke anyone?
No.
What happened next?
I remember at this point, the Oriental that was sitting the second from the end saying something to the man on his left, which I couldn't pick up, okay, and he got up.
Okay. At that point, did you notice that he was an Oriental person?
Probably did.
Do you recall testimony in this court that Vincent Chin stood up and said, "Don't call me a motherfucker"?
Yes.
Do you recall hearing that in the bar that night?
Not distinctly, no.
Do you recall hearing it at all?
No, I don't.
Do you recall testimony in court that you stood up and said, "Big fuckers, little fuckers, we're all fuckers"? Do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
Did you say that?
I don't remember saying it.
Could you have said it?
Yes, I could have said that.
When you saw the person say something to the other gentleman on his left, what is the next thing that happened after that?
I really didn't pay much attention to him. I was watching the dancer. He proceeded around, and I guess the next time I was really aware of him was when he turned around and he was standing directly in front of me.
What happened then?
Punched me.
Up to that point, did you call him, or anyone else for that matter, the word chink?
No.
Do you recall calling anyone a nip?
No.
Do you recall saying anything about being out of work or words to that effect?
No.
Did you say those words?
No.
We move to Evan's testimony that he and Nitz were driving in their car when they saw Vincent and Jimmy Choi outside of McDonald's.
All right. What happened next?
And as we drove by, Michael seen him sitting out front on the steps or whatever it was out there and sitting there laughing. And it must have been real funny to him.
How'd you feel at that point?
Angry.
Why?
Same reason, I guess. The man had sucker punched me, and he was responsible for splitting Mike's head open. I was just angry.
What did you do?
Told Mike to park the car.
When you got out of the car, did you have the bat with you?
Yes.
What did you do then?
I ran around to where they were sitting, and I hollered at them.
Then what did you do?
I said, "You sons of bitches."
Then what happened?
They jumped up and started to run. And I was on top of them and took a swing and caught the chin in the arm.
You took a swing with the bat,
Yes, sir.
caught him in the arm.
Yes.
What happened then?
I more or less just stopped as they took off running.
What happened then?
Mike came around, and he caught Chin in the middle of the lane of traffic out there.
What did you do then?
When I seen Mike scuffling, it just flashed in my mind, he's going to get hurt again. And I started toward him, and something just snapped. I don't remember there on what happened.
Did you hit Mr. Chin?
Not that I remember.
Were you trying to kill Mr. Chin, Mr. Evans?
No.
Do you remember what you were trying to do?
No, I don't.
What is the next thing that you do remember?
I remember looking up and seeing a revolver pointed at me and a man saying, "Drop the bat."
The prosecution cross-examined.
Well, Mr. Evans, you told us a lot about that night, but now you tell us that you blacked out and you can't tell us much about the beating. Is that right?
That is true.
Let me show you Government Exhibit 14. Is this the bat that you used to kill Vincent Chin?
I can't tell you that. I don't know.
Could you show us how you were holding the bat when you asked Gary and Bob, "Where is your friend?"
I can't tell you that. I don't know.
Now, when you were in the car saying, "When I catch these Chinese guys, I'm going to bust their heads," you hadn't blacked out at that point, had you?
I never said that.
When you found Vincent Chin and said, "There they are," you hadn't blacked out at that point either, had you?
I don't know.
So only when you caught up with Vincent Chin and started swinging the bat at him, that is when you blacked out. Is that your testimony?
Just prior to that.
You can't remember hitting Vincent Chin in the head so he couldn't run away, do you?
No.
You don't remember hitting him in the arms, do you?
No.
You can't remember hitting him in the chest, and the shoulder, and the face.
No, I can't remember.
You can't remember hitting him in the head as he lay there on the ground.
No, I can't.
You can't remember telling the police that you are sorry, but look at what they did to your son. You do remember that, don't you?
Not really.
You had the presence of mind at that point to think of an explanation, didn't you?
I don't remember being asked for an explanation.
Mr. Evans, if you would take the bat, maybe it would bring something back.
Objection, Your Honor. I think we've had enough with the bat, and this is purely meant to harass the witness.
Ask a question, counselor. That's not a question.
Yes, all right. Mr. Evans, have you ever chased a man because of a drunken fight and beat him to death?
No. Outside of this time, only Vincent Chin.
And because he looked like Mr. Vincent Chin, isn't that right, Mr. Evans?
No, that is not right.
The lawyer summed up on June 26, 1984, focusing on the issue of motivation.
There is really only one reasonable explanation for Vincent Chin's brutal killing. In the minds of Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz, Vincent Chin was a chink who dared to stand up to them. Vincent Chin and his friends were having a good time. They were spending a lot of money, and that bothered Ronald Evans. So Ronald Evans began a barrage of racial insults and obscenities directed at Chin's mother. He was talking about foreign cars, and because of "you motherfuckers," We in the auto industry are out of work. But ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to decide that Ronald Ebbins and Michael Nitz acted with any racial intent just on the basis of a few derogatory remarks. Rather, examine what they did, and you will be convinced why they did it. When they walked into the Fancy Pants Lounge that night, they only knew two things about Vincent Chin. One, that he was Oriental, and two, he was looking for a good time. They, of course, had never met him before. They saw an Oriental acting flamboyantly, spending a lot of money. How do you think Ronald Ebbins reacted to that? Now the racial animal inside Ronald Ebbins had been unleashed, and now his prey was anything Oriental. The brutality and the ferocity of the attack on Vincent Chin tell you that this was no mere barroom brawl that got out of hand. After Michael Nitz got Mr. Chin in a bear hug, Ebbins' savage and repeated use of that bat, even after Chin lay motionless on the pavement, cannot be reasonably explained by mere anger or revenge. The defendants are wrong in saying that this was nothing more than a barroom fight. This was violent hatred turned loose. This was years of pent-up racial hostility and rage unleashed. This was a modern-day lynching, but there is a bat instead of a rope.
Defense counsel argued that the issue of race was a fabrication.
How did this tragic incident become infused with race? Meetings with witnesses began to take place, and into this scenario of intoxicated violence, witnesses began to inject, as Jimmy Choi says, their thoughts, their ideas, and images of possible racist motivations. A transformation of facts occurs because people went back to take a second look at what happened to see if they could come up with any evidence to support a second prosecution. Suddenly, when Vincent Chin said, "I'm not a motherfucker," it was in response not to simply being called a motherfucker, but instead to being called a chick, a nick, to some reference about being out of work and foreign cars. What had never been a racial incident became one. And it became one gradually. That's why we have 3 different racial allegations by 3 different people surfacing at 3 different times. People worked hard with each other and their attorneys, searching the dark recesses of their minds to find something, anything, that could make this a racial event. Vincent Chin was the same as Ronald Ebbins, a human being. He was not a person who had only great virtues and no faults. Vincent Chin got drunk, and he went to nude bars and started a fight, and then wanted to finish it. And Mr. Ebbins, like Vincent Chin, became full of rage, and Mr. Ebbins wanted revenge. Vincent Chin wanted to finish the fight. Does this make him a hero or a martyr? None of this happened to Vincent Chin because of his race.
On June 28, 1984, the jury returned its verdict.
Will the foreman please rise? Mr. Foreman, do you have a unanimous verdict for each of the counts as to each of the 2 defendants?
We have, Your Honor.
Will the clerk please read the verdict?
In the case of United States of America versus Ronald Ebbins and Michael Nitz, the verdict form reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant Michael Nitz not guilty as to count 1 and not guilty as to count 2. We, the jury, find the defendant Ronald Ebbins not guilty as to count 1 and guilty as to count 2.
The jury thus found Evans guilty of violating the civil rights of Vincent Chin on account of his race. He was sentenced on September 18, 1984. After hearing from defense counsel, Judge Taylor gave Evans an opportunity to be heard, and then, without elaboration, she tersely announced her sentence.
Mr. Evans, is there anything you would like to say?
Only, Your Honor, I have expressed my regret and my remorse on several occasions, and I would just like to reiterate that one more time, I am sorry for what happened. I can't say any more than that. At this point, I have no recourse but to depend on the American system of justice and you, Your Honor.
Is that all? It is adjudged, Mr. Evans, that you are committed to the custody of the Attorney General for a term of 25 years. It is recommended that you be committed to an institution where you may receive treatment for alcohol abuse.
Evans appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Circuit Judge Albert J. Engel issued the court's decision on September 11, 1986. The court addressed several issues, including Evans' argument that the federal civil rights law in question did not extend to Orientals. The court rejected the argument, holding that the statute protected any person because of his race, color, religion, or national origin from intimidation or interference in the enjoyment of public accommodations. Citing Yikwo versus Hopkins, Judge Engel wrote,
Orientals come within the broad constitutional protections of the 14th Amendment, even though the original thrust of the amendment primarily motivated by concern for the rights of Black persons.
Judge Engel also rejected the argument that Judge Taylor erred in refusing to transfer the case because of the pretrial publicity.
We have carefully reviewed the extensive record made of the publicity in this case and agree that it was indeed pervasive. The nearly unanimous public judgment that Evans and his stepson received jail terms and the harsh criticism of the state trial judge, followed by the federal prosecution of defendants based upon the same incident, were bound to lead to a strong public impression that justice had not been done in the state court and that it was incumbent upon the federal government to right the wrong by a second prosecution. While it probably would have been advisable for the trial judge to have ordered a change of venue, we conclude that there was not reversible error for the trial judge to proceed to impanel the jury.
Ultimately, however, the Sixth Circuit held that Evans was denied a fair trial. The court concluded that Judge Taylor had erred in allowing a witness to testify about racist remarks about blacks purportedly made by Evans some 10 years earlier. The court also strongly disapproved of what is described as inflammatory language by the prosecution in summation. The court was most troubled, however, by Judge Taylor's ruling not to allow the defense to introduce the tape recordings of the meetings Liza Chan had with the witnesses.
Evans and co-defendant Nitz sought to introduce into evidence tape recordings of interviews which had been conducted by Liza Chan with these witnesses. The defense purpose was to demonstrate that the witnesses' testimony concerning Evans' racist statements was false, and that it was the result of improper coaching of them by Chan in preparation for the trial. Each time the defendant sought to introduce the tapes, however, the court sustained the government objection on hearsay grounds. The government concedes that these rulings were erroneous. We unanimously conclude that a consideration of the relevant factors mandates reversal. Evans should have been permitted to introduce into evidence the entire contents of the tapes. The three witnesses were the most crucial of all witnesses for the government. It is true that the district court permitted the defense to elicit a few of the statements, but it was not within the province of the court's proper discretion to prevent the jury from hearing the tapes themselves and judging for themselves the impact upon the witnesses which the purported conversation had, and measuring that against the statements made in court by the witnesses.
The Court of Appeals was so troubled by what it heard on the tapes that it included, as an appendix to its decision, excerpts from the meeting of Liza Chan and Choi, Koi-woo, and Sarosky on May 17, 1983. Liza Chin was only 3 years out of law school at the time, and she was not a litigator. She met with the witnesses as a group, and she recorded the conversations. We reenact portions of the meeting for you now.
So the purpose of this meeting tonight is so that we can help each other remember exactly what happened, how it happened, when it happened, and all the minor details. I was talking this afternoon with a parking lot attendant, the black guy. According to his versions of the facts, it's quite different from what I have so far understood them to be. So I would center on what you, the three of you, say they are, and somehow try to fit all the facts around these. We will agree this is the story. This is it. When it's a federal prosecution, we're all going to have to be agreeing on what actually happened. Now, if you don't agree, like you definitely remembered certain things happened, say it was a black car, and you definitely remembered it as a white car, and we kind of, all right, other than that, let's all have it all sort of have it down pat. Is it 5 minutes or is it 10 minutes? Is it more like 8 minutes? Let's all agree. Otherwise, you all look funny on the stand. You all supposedly were there.
Well, is there any harm in getting too accurate? Because, they could say, well, you all rehearsed this. Like, if you're in court and we all have exactly the same times?
Well, as long as you're within, you could say 8:10, you could say 8:20. I mean, that doesn't matter.
Right, but as long as they have an example.
Right. But as far as the crucial facts, the crucial ones are not conflicting. So let me give you an example. Like what you people have been telling me, and then what the parking lot attendant has told me, totally makes me completely confused. That's like going to be raising a question in a jury's mind. Like, well, who's telling the truth? Or what actually happened? Maybe nobody's to be believed. Now, I don't mean exactly everybody agree, okay? Everybody agree to 6:30 right on the dot. Okay. But I mean, you can't say that we stayed at Fancy Pants for 2 hours and then another person says we stayed at Fancy Pants for half an hour. I mean, that's a big discrepancy there.
Right.
Then Vincent started out of the chair.
Yeah.
He ran over.
Yeah.
So you remember.
That's why I remember just before he got up, he says, "Don't call me motherfucker." Remember that.
Okay. We all remember our different lines, okay? There's no agreement that's fine. Just remember your different lines.
Right.
So, chink, foreign cars, big fucker, little fucker, all fuckers, don't call me a fucker. We all remember our lines, okay? I'm just guessing here. It's logical, right? I could be wrong. Okay. So, let's get it straight. He said, I just don't know whether you're a big fucker or a little fucker, because he had earlier said, big fuckers, little fuckers, we're all fuckers.
Well, maybe that's how they thought they heard that.
I just don't know whether you're a big one or a little one.
Right.
Yeah, could be.
Okay.
But after I tapped Vincent and Evans, Evans said, I just don't know if you're a big or little fucker. That's when Vincent said, I told you I'm not a fucker, friend.
Did anybody hear that?
I didn't hear it, but, he's talking to him and, I might have saw him point out to the no, I can't say something like that.
I think I heard him say, nobody calls me a motherfucker.
I can't even say that.
Hmm.
The record did contain other evidence that race was a motivating factor, evidence that was not tainted, even arguably by the Liza Chan meeting. For example, Racine Caldwell, the fancy pants dancer, testified that Evans yelled at Vincent, "It's because of you little motherfuckers that we're out of work." Jimmy Perry, a bystander near the fancy pants lounge, testified that he was given $20 by Nitz and Evans, helped them find 2 Chinese guys so that they could bust their heads. And as the prosecution argued, the brutality and ferocity of the attack was proof that this was just not another barroom brawl, but an attack driven by race and bigotry. The Sixth Circuit reversed the judgment and conviction and remanded the case to Judge Taylor for a new trial. On remand, Evans renewed the motion for a change of venue because of the adverse publicity. This time, Judge Taylor granted the motion. She observed that there had been even more publicity about the case since the first trial.
Most damaging of all the post-reversal coverage, in the view of this court, was the October 12, 1986 Detroit News Sunday Magazine cover story on the victim's mother, Lily Chin. The magazine cover was comprised of full-page color photographs of the still grieving mother. The lengthy story inside, accompanied by more photographs, told of the tragic deterioration of her life to that of a homeless wanderer since the death of her son. The effect of this major feature alone, in the newspaper of largest circulation in Michigan and Northern Ohio, is extremely prejudicial to the court's ability to secure an impartial jury in this case. Moreover, the leadership of this community, including the president and members of the Detroit City Council, who declared a day of mourning in honor of Vincent Chin and presented a memorial to his mother, have been quoted by the news media uniformly to the effect that the defendant must be punished. Editorial comment, both broadcast and press, and letters to the editor continue strenuously and unanimously to stress the fact that defendant has never been punished.
Judge Taylor ordered a transfer of the case to the Southern District of Ohio, the federal court in Cincinnati. Ironically, the Asian American community's success at publicizing the injustice to Vincent Chin was a factor in causing the transfer of the case from Detroit, a city with a Black majority and a history of civil rights, caught in the economic woes afflicting the automotive industry, to Cincinnati, a city known for its Southern sensibilities. Indeed, during jury selection in Cincinnati, only 19 of the more than 200 prospective jurors said they had ever met an Asian American. In addition to different demographics of the jury pool, the prosecution team faced several new challenges. With memories fading, its witnesses would have to testify to 5-year-old events. More impeachment material existed in the form of testimony from the first trial. Evidentiary rulings that had gone the government's way the first time had been reversed. And Evans, whose selective memory had not impressed the jury when he testified in Detroit, did not take the stand in the second trial. It was no surprise then when, on May 1st, 1987, the jury returned a verdict in the Cincinnati courtroom finding Ronald Evans not guilty of violating Vincent Chin's civil rights.
The Cincinnati jury was not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Evans' actions were motivated by Vincent Chin's race. Was race a factor? Evans steadfastly denied that he was motivated by Vincent Chin's race, and in post-trial interviews he continued to deny that he was a racist. Perhaps Evans was not a hardcore racist, but racism is more ambiguous, complex, and subtle. Clearly, the mix of recession, alcohol, testosterone, and tempers was a lethal combination. Perhaps Evans was not a racist in the conventional, simple sense, but he may very well have been motivated by racial impulses that he was only dimly aware of, if at all. As he put it in trying to explain his actions, something snapped, and the brutality of his actions led to the death of Vincent Chin.
What is the legacy of Vincent Chin? Despite the disappointment of many in the final verdict, the Vincent Chin case had a great impact, both on the administration of justice in general and on the Asian American community in particular. The Vincent Chin case sparked a public discourse on the practice of Wayne County prosecutors not to appear for sentencing proceedings. The case showed how important it was for prosecutors to participate in sentencings and for victims and their families to be given notice of court proceedings. In the years following the Vincent Chin case, federal and state laws, including in Michigan, were enacted giving victims greater rights. And in the discussions leading to the passage of hate crime laws, the Chin case was often cited. The Vincent Chin case also highlighted the need for reform in sentencing and plea bargaining. Within a month after Judge Kaufman sentenced Evans and Nitz to probation, the Wayne County prosecutor announced a ban on manslaughter plea bargains in murder prosecutions. On the federal level, the Sentencing Reform Act was passed in 1984 in an effort to reduce disparities in sentencing. As for Asian Americans, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals held that, indeed, Asian Americans were protected by this country's civil rights laws. The murder of Vincent Chin and its aftermath awakened our civil rights consciousness. Asian Americans came together and became a community, one with a voice. For Asian Americans, the death of a man was the birth of a movement.
Lily Chin, Vincent's mother, was an inspiration to many. Although she barely spoke English, she led a courageous effort to seek justice for her son. She became so disheartened, however, that after the final verdict in September of 1987, she returned to her native village in Guangzhou, China. There she remained until 2001, when illness forced her back to the United States for medical treatment. On June 9, 2002, Lily Chin died at the age of 82 in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Timothy Ferguson as narrator.
Alice Sum as narrator.
Guy Noah as Bruce Saperstein, defense counsel for the state criminal trial.
Ben Dowers as Ronald Evans, defendant.
E.J. Hubbs as Theodore Merritt, prosecutor for the federal trial.
Zara Elias as David Lawson, first defense counsel in the federal trial.
Alan Gins Ayers as Racine Caldwell, dancer witness.
Jay Kim as Jimmy Choi, Vincent Chin's friend and witness.
Vanessa Chen as Frank Eamon, second defense counsel in the federal trial.
Jacqueline Gardner as the clerk.
Melissa Massatelli as the foreman.
Anchanto Am as Liza Chen, community leader.
Maria Aguila as Gary Kovu, Vincent Chin's friend.
Greg Moswinkle as Robert Swarovski, Vincent Chin's friend.
Jeanette Bigney as Judge Charles Kaufman, state court judge.
Hope Cannon as Judge Anna Diggs Taylor, federal child judge.
Rog Sengal as Judge Engel, 6th Appellate Circuit.
Alan Gins Ayers, artistic director.
Sandy Chu, producer.
Bernice Lee, director.
Thank you so much for joining this reenactment. One thing, I had a couple closing remarks. I'm half Japanese, and so in my life I was in plenty of fights and took plenty of punches and kicks while being called a gook or a chink. And then even one time I was jumped at a mall by a bunch of guys because I was a white boy. So when I hear the story of Vincent Chin, I can't help but think that there, but for the grace of God, go I. Unfortunately, people like Srinivas Kuchibhotla, an Asian Indian, were not so fortunate. In 2017, 35 years after Vincent Chin's murder, He was mistaken for a Muslim at a bar and was murdered by a Kansas man who called him a terrorist and yelled, "Get out of my country." So the song remains the same. And if anything, the last several years have shown to be a crescendo of us versus them violence. So the retelling of Vincent Chin's story not only instructs us as to the past, but informs us as to the present. One of the things it teaches us is that we are stronger when we speak up for each other within and across racial lines. And we must all look beyond our tribes and stand up for anyone who is treated as lesser American or less than human. Otherwise, we may never reach the end of this long road to justice and peace that we are all on. So thank you again for joining us today, and have a great evening.